Well, thank you for being here. I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 12. Seems like ages since we talked about Matthew 12, but probably hadn't been that long. Matthew chapter 12, we're actually wanting to try to deal with verse 9 and 10 of Matthew chapter 12. And I want to, of course, get you into the context of it. Two stories are being given to us, one in chapter 12, verse 1 down through verse 8, and then the second story is verse 9 down through verse 14. And Matthew's using these as illustrations. And of course, the illustrations are for the purpose of bringing us into a comparison between the Pharisees and Jesus, basically the Pharisees and their concept of rest over against Jesus and his concept of rest. And I've really been intrigued and thrilled, and have been talking more and more in some other sessions about Jesus and his call to rest. And of course, it's given to you at the end of chapter 11, where he gives this phenomenal invitation, which is the invitation to come to me. It is not an imperative, it's not a command, he's not ordering you. And he's not even calling you to get up from where you are and go where he is, because he knows you can't pull that off. He's not calling you to reform. He's not calling you to straighten your life out. He's not calling you to get things in order and then come to where he is. It's an invitation to come to. You'll remember the word to is pros, and it simply has the idea of turning your head. It has to do with direction. So it's the idea of, man, if you would just turn your head. I know you can't. You're exhausted, because that's who the invitation is to. Come to me, all you who labor. And the word labor, you remember, is total, absolute exhaustion. Can't move. You're just worn out. And why are you worn out? Because you are heavy laden, which is the idea of heavy loads laid upon you. So it's the picture of legalism. It's the picture of the New Testament Jew. It's the picture of all that Israel has done in terms of the oral interpretations and the oral laws. It's the picture of Jews who just heap law upon law. They can't possibly pull it off. They're absolutely worn out. They desperately are trying to meet up to the standard that God wants for them, be what they ought to be, and yet failing all the time, who are just living in this vicious circle of guilt, and yet attempting and more guilt and attempting and more guilt, just absolutely worn out. And he said, hey, I know you're so tired. You cannot straighten yourself out. You can't come from where you are. If you just turn your head, man, towards me, whoo, I'd be all over you. I would be all over you. Come to me. And the invitation, of course, is for rest. And you'll remember that the word give is not there in the original language. It's simply, I will rest you. So it isn't something he's going to give to us. It's something he is within us. It's the peace of God from all the stress of all I ought to be and can't. It's the rest of the very essence of the resourcing of the divine God within the individual. And as you move on into the passage, verse 29, we realize it's not a solve your problems. It's not become a couch potato. It's not lean back. It's not inactivity. It's not you don't need to do anything. It's not that at all. It's, oh, if you would link with me. It's the yoke thing. Isn't that beautiful? In other words, the problems haven't gone away. Everything's exactly like it was. The weight of my life is as heavy as it's always been. But, oh, do you realize he's linked with me and he is so strong that the burdens seem light? Because of the amazing person of Jesus. I got to have this. I got to have this. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Here's the rest that Jesus promises. Now, when he gets done with that whole invitation, Matthew says, oh, let me compare that with the Pharisees and who they are. And he gives these two stories. Now, the first story, obviously, there are two illustrations, and the first illustration is given to us in verse 1 down through verse 8. And it's the picture of the grain field. And you remember the disciples it's on the Sabbath day, and the disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. They are picking grain, which is okay on any other day if you're hungry. just to reach over and pick some grain and eat it. That's okay, but not on the Sabbath day. So they're walking along and they're picking this grain, which is reaping. And of course, that's against the law on the Sabbath day. They are rubbing it in their hands, and that's thrashing. That's against the Sabbath day law. They are blowing the chaff away, so there's nothing left but the grain. That's winnowing. That breaks the Sabbath day law. And then they eat it, which of course is okay to eat on the Sabbath day. But hey, being a disciple, they probably eat too much. So that breaks the Sabbath day law. So here they've broken the Sabbath day law 4 times, so we can stone you to death 4 times. The Pharisees are all over that. And in verse 2, you'll note, they say, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. It's the grain fields. Now, we discovered a spiritual principle out of this grain field scene. And what we've discovered as we've walked through both of these illustrations, or at least some of these illustrations, we discovered that the spiritual principle is simply this, that what we are in the grain field is what we are in the place of worship. We preached a whole sermon on that, in fact. That what you are in the grain field is what you are in the place of worship. You see that, for instance, in the Pharisees. Because the second story, they are in the temple, that is, in the synagogue. And as they come to the place of worship, there's a man with the withered hand. Jesus obviously is going to heal this guy. The Pharisees are all over that. See, the same attitude they had in the grain field is the same attitude they have in the place of worship. What you are in the place of in the grain field is what you are in the place of worship. There is no difference. Don't think that putting on a tie and coming to church was a joke, folks. Makes any difference. And the whole idea that I was raised with as a kid, and I remember this all my life, somebody was always saying, oh, and you're in church too. And you did that in church. Like it was okay to do that out there, but you couldn't do it in here. Like out there is different than in here. And he says, no. The grain field, what you are in the grain field is what you are in the place of worship. In fact, we discovered in the second illustration, as we have been working on it and are working on it, we haven't gotten too far, but as we are working on it, in the place of worship, when they come into the place of worship, the truth of the place of worship, the spiritual principle is, the truth in the place of worship is the truth in the grain field. So whatever is true in the place of worship is true also out there in the grain field. Now, you understand your grain field, just so we're clear here, is where you work. It's where you live. It's your home. Come on. It's your going to school. It's your day in and day out life. Place of worship we understand here, but you don't spend much time here. Hey, your time is spent in the grain field. But the truth in the place of worship is the truth in the grain field. There aren't 2 standards of truth here. There isn't a standard of activity for the church and a standard of activity for out there. Could I propose to you, there's not a standard of dress here and a standard of dress out there. There's not a standard of language here and a standard of language out there. Could I propose to you, there's not a standard of thought process out there and a standard of thought process in here. In fact, could I tell you, as he gets into the illustration, that there's not a dual standard for laymen and preachers, that the standard for me is the standard for you. And the standard for you is the standard for me. Well, preacher, you ought to pray. So should you. Preacher, we expect you to be in the Word. So we expect you to be in the Word. We expect you to be faithful, preacher. I expect you to be faithful. We expect you to give your all. I expect you to give your all. See the grain field? Place of worship. No difference. The truth is the same. Now we saw this in the 3 illustrations that he gave, and I just want to walk you through those because that sets the base for what we're going to talk about tonight. He gives these 3 illustrations in the first story. They have come, of course, in verse 2, the Pharisees looked and said, look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath day. They were picking the grain and eating it as we described. Jesus says, let me give you an explanation of that. And he walks into this first story, which is verse 3, down through verse 4, which is the showbread thing. And he tells about this David and his group that were running from Saul the King Saul for their lives. And they'd been running for 3 days with no food. And they came to the tabernacle at that time and went into the tabernacle and asked the priest for food. And of course, he didn't have any to feed these 300 men. So they got the showbread. Now, the showbread was baked. 12 loaves were baked fresh every Sabbath day and put on the sacrifice altar for God. And they sat there all week. And then at the end, when new and fresh showbread was baked, they took the old showbread. Oh, the priest got it. He was the only one who was allowed to eat it, which probably was a priest thing. But anyhow, he was the only one who could eat it. And then they replaced it with this new showbread. So the priest, being the only one who could eat it by the law of God, that priest gave this showbread to David and his men, and they ate the showbread. And fire didn't come down from heaven and burn them up either. Seemed to be okay. What was the showbread thing? The showbread is all about the fact that we're taking what's in the grain field and we're bringing it in and putting it on the sacrifice altar before God. So what's going on in the grain field is now really going on in the temple. Does it make any sense to you? So Christian experience is all about what? It's all about day after day after day, life experience being brought before God and laid on the sacrifice altar before Him. And my day in and day out life becomes the sacrifice, the presentation to God. Because there's no difference between the grain field and the place of worship. Because the grain field is in the place of worship. Man, I love that. Interesting that Martin Luther in the Reformation came up with this strong, one of the 99 thesis things, one of the things that really mattered, one of the things that he pounded was the sacredness of every man's vocation. It's sacred to preach. It's not sacred to do electrical work. Good night. It's sacred to pray. Oh, it's not sacred to be a mechanic. Get your hands dirty. He said, what are you talking about? That it's just as sacred to be a carpenter as it is to be a preacher. That the very act of preaching is not any more sacred than the act of anything else you do. That was a protest in the Protestant movement, which eliminated the hierarchy of the Pope-priest thing and brought every man equal before God, who could literally kneel before God and have his life constantly exposed in the presence of an Almighty. And that every man was to do everything he did to the glory of God. Which meant if you were going to preach with fervor, you should plumb with fervor. Why? Because it's to the glory of God. That means down at your factory job, man, you're not working for some foreman, you're working for Jesus. Whew. That changes everything. Because this is not about money. And someplace, somewhere, you've got to get beyond working for money and working for the glory of Jesus. What a concept. The showbread. Because what's in the grain field dwells in the presence of God. Awesome. Then he gives this second illustration, which is the Sabbath day workers, which is verse 5 through 6. And you know what's going on there. He says, have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blessed, and are blameless? Well, what's going on? Well, the priests, they light candles, they light fires, they slaughter animals, they lift heavy weights. Well, you can't do that on the Sabbath day. Priests can in the temple. It's okay. Why? Well, it's a different setup. Because you see, they're not out in the grain field, they're in the temple doing their thing. And they're doing it before God. So it's okay to work in the church, but it's not okay to work out there. But you need to understand that the same work that's being done here is being done out there. They're slaughtering animals in here. They're slaughtering animals out there. They're lighting fires in here. They're lighting fires out there. So what's going on out there is going on in here, and there is no difference between the grain field and the place of worship. Phenomenal concept. Again, this whole idea of the sacredness of every man's vocation, this whole idea of, and we talked to you about this, practicing his presence. You've got to get into that. Oh, how can we get you into practicing his presence? How can I make you practice his presence? How can I cause you to get God off of the shelf? How can I cause you to get him out of the prayer closet? What a rotten concept. I was taught that God lives in a prayer closet. And if I want to go see him, I got to go to the closet. What an awful concept. Because the whole concept of the New Testament is that, and that's the point of the Sabbath day workers, that Jesus says, don't you understand that one greater than the temple is here? Not meaning himself as God, but meaning himself as man who's filled with God, so that we become the temple. Paul is so strong on that. Got to read you a passage on that again. Paul is so strong on that we have become the very temple of the Holy Spirit. Why? Because God indwells me. And if God indwells my flesh, do you understand that I am in constant, the practice of his presence, the living in his wonder, the being sourced by his divine grace? There isn't a day I do stuff and then 6 days I don't do stuff or I do something else. Don't you understand that it is all about, he indwells me and I'm living in his presence. And Brother Lawrence said, I can't see any difference between, my superiors want me to come to the altar and pray. And he says, I guess it's okay. But I don't see any difference between washing dishes in the kitchen and praying at the altar. God is as just a real one place as he is the other. Whoa! So how much do you pray? Well, and we've gone over this. How much would be enough? How much prayer would be enough? An hour? 1/24 of your day, you lousy no good. You watch TV more than that. Oh, yeah, you're right. How about 3 hours? Would you go for 4? Would you really feel proud if you prayed 5 hours a day? Would you say, I'm really spiritual because I pray 10 hours a day? Would you not be embarrassed to do anything less than 24 hours a day? Because you are the temple and you live in his presence. And the all of life is somehow wrapped up in the intimacy of his being, and you are literally living in his fellowship, and he is in the middle of everything. Don't do anything without him being present in the middle of it. Good night. Don't have a problem without dragging him into the middle of it. Man. You have become the temple. The last one is this superior mercy thing. He says, yet I say to you that that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you'd known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Superior mercy. Said, what I really want is mercy, not sacrifice. Now, sacrifice is okay. It's what you do in the temple. In fact, he commanded them to do it. So it's not that that's bad. We understand that. So it's okay to do sacrifices. So he's not saying eliminate all the sacrifices. He's not saying that. What he's saying is you come to the temple and make sacrifice, but you don't do mercy out there. And what you do out there is what you do in here. Come on. Because there isn't any difference between the grain field and the place of worship. How did we get so messed up? How did it get so twisted? how did we get to the place where we come here and put on a show and act different out there? How did we ever get to the place where we thought that the presence of God was more real here than it is there? How did we get there? How did that happen? I think he tells us. That's what we want to talk about tonight. Look at this. Verse 9. Now, when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue. Start with this. Asset. Who does the temple belong to? Who does the synagogue belong to? Oh, it's their synagogue. It's an ownership issue. Who owns the synagogue? Well, they do. It's an ownership issue. In fact, the language in verse 9 is very, very heavy. There is a departing language that is given to us at the beginning, and when he had departed from there. So obviously, he's emphasizing the fact that they were in the grain field, and Jesus has left that grain field. But then the main verb of the sentence is went. And went is the idea of literally arriving someplace or arriving at a new, entering a place, that kind of idea. So it's I'm departing from there. And isn't it interesting? He emphasizes that. Why didn't he just say he went? But no, he left the grain field and he went to the place of worship. And note how the place of worship is stated. He went into their synagogue. If you could see this in the original language, it would look like this. There's an article before the word synagogue, which emphasizes the synagogue itself. So it's the synagogue, theirs. So the emphasis of the passage is upon the fact that the synagogue belongs to them. Who does it belong to? Well, obviously, the Pharisees who are doing the criticism. They own the synagogue. Now, this is really easy when you're in the grain field. See, I own the grain field. Well, yeah, I own the grain field. Why? Listen, that land has been in my family for years. I bought some additional acreage next to what my family owns. I've worked hard all my life, plowed, planted. Listen, I own the grain field. In fact, the grain that's in the grain field is mine. I'm responsible for it. I'm the guy that planted it. I'm the guy that plowed. I'm the guy that fertilized. I'm the guy that planted it. I'm the guy that's going to harvest it. Listen, I'm the guy that built the barns. This is mine. See, we don't have any problem with owning the grain field. How about your house? It's mine. How about your yard? It's mine. How about your car? It's mine. How about it's mine, it's mine, it's mine. See, that's easy. We all live there in that language. See, I proudly take you outside of town, and I reach into my cubbyhole and I pull out the deed and tile and say, that 15 acres is mine. See, grain field, we understand that. But what's true out there is true in here. Spiritual principle. See, there ain't any difference. If you own the grain field, guess what? You own the place of worship too. Now, we don't say we own the place of worship. Nobody would say that. What we say is, this is God's house. But attitude-wise, we know better than that. This is not God's house. Well, it is God's house. No, it's my house, which means he's a guest in my place. Have you ever been a guest in somebody's house? I've done it thousands of times. It's interesting. They are so kind. They say, listen, act like it's yours. Hey, just use the refrigerator like it was yours. But I go to the refrigerator, and none of my food is in there. It's their food. All fattening. Why? I'm a guest. Oh, the TV, use the TV, but I turn on the channels and hey, the channels that I ordered from DirecTV are not the ones they ordered. Why? It's not my TV. I don't own it. I'm a guest. I'm a guest. Hey, make yourself at home in the bedroom. I get on the bed. Mercy, get a new mattress. But they do that on purpose because they don't want you to stay that long. You're a guest. You're a guest. Hey, God, this is our place. You're a guest. Make yourself at home, Jesus. What about the music? Well, we're going to have the kind of music we want. What if he doesn't like it? Well, nobody's going to ask him. He's a guest. What about the colors on the wall? Well, maybe we're not consulting him on that. Because this is our place. We own it. We build it. My great-grandfather gave the land that this property, this church house is built on. Ever heard that? He's a guest. You know, hey, I'm really on this, aren't I? I apologize. Is this a pet peeve? I don't think so. I don't know. But in the evangelical church, you know what we seem to have developed is that you own this place, which means we have to cater to you. Why? Because it's yours. And God is a guest. What programs are we going to have? Oh, we're going to have the programs that Jesus... No, we're not. We're going to have the programs that get you to come. What kind of sermons are we going to preach? Well, we're going to preach what God... No, we're not. We're going to preach what you like. Why? Because you own this place. You know how many times, at least once a month, when we were in evangelism, at least once a month, somebody would say to me, well, we're sure glad you're here, evangelist. Why? Because we need somebody to tell us the truth at least once a year. Because the pastor can't do that because he has to live here. Which means the pastor can't really preach the truth because, well, nobody would come back the next Sunday. So we bring in some specialist who can rip us up and we'll feel bad for a week and then get over it. Why? Because you guys own this place. And we don't dare offend because oh mercy. We've set that structure up. And the whole thing is about ownership. Oh, we've talked about this building, but let's go back to the Sabbath worker thing. That illustration that Jesus gives in verse 5. The Sabbath worker is all about what? It's all about one greater than the temple is here, meaning what? It's all about not Jesus is greater because he's God, but Jesus is greater because he's a man filled with God, and we've moved into a new covenant, and the new covenant is all about what? It's all about, you have become the temple. And let me read you this verse again from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19 and 20. What a verse. We've been on it several times, but look at it again. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God? And you are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Whoa! Do you know what that means? That means we're not talking about some dumb building. Did I just call this church building dumb? We're not talking about some building, friend. You know what we're talking about? We're talking about your body, who you are. You are the temple. Well, I own it. He says, no, you don't. No, you don't. Now, that's really easy to understand in the grain field. See, you take me outside of town in your car, and you say, I own these 15 acres, and you reach into the cubby hole, and you bring out the title deed, and there it is, and see, I own it. No, you don't. Yeah, I own this. No, you don't. I paid cash for it. You don't own it. Prove it to me. That's easy. All I have to do is look at you and say, bring me back to this spot 100 years from now and tell me you own it. You don't own anything. You don't own anything out there. Could I tell you, you don't own anything in here either. Because what's true out there, it's true in here. That's his whole point, that you do not own the temple. Now, if the problem is this ownership thing, what did that produce? Look at this. Verse 10. Behold, there was a man with a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? That they might accuse him. So you know what this whole thought process produced? Accusing. Now, accusing literally in the Greek means to speak against, which they were constantly doing. Oh, they did it in the grain field. I know. Now they're doing it in the temple. I know. In the synagogue. I know. And they are accusing Jesus, see, which was not just an activity, it was an attitude that they had. It was the attitude of accusation. We're going to preach a whole sermon on this. Just want to give you a taste of it. It's phenomenal. Accusing. Well, why were they accusing? Ownership. It was theirs. See, and when something becomes yours, you get really protective, guarding. And ownership produces an attitude of accusing because it's mine. I own this synagogue. Oh, you do? Yeah. That's why I get upset about the colors. I own this synagogue. Oh, you do? Yeah. That's why I get upset and I criticize the music. I own this synagogue. You do? That's why I get upset when and they did, and then they, why? Because I own the synagogue. See, it's an ownership deal. Now, let me ask you this. What would happen if God, think about this. What would happen if God owned the synagogue? Well, what colors does he want? He doesn't care. Really? Yeah, he doesn't care. Well, would he go for hymns or would he go for choruses? He doesn't care. Should we be like the Church of Christ and have no musical instruments, or should we have more musical instruments? He doesn't care. Well, if he owns it, he must care about something. He does. Love one another. Well, I care about colors because you own it. I criticize because you own it. I get upset over it because you own it. If he owned it, you'd have to be concerned about the thing that bothers him the most, which is about what? How we love one another. There ought to be some good amens on this. Because that's what he cares about. Oh, we're talking about a building again, aren't we? Let's get off the building thing. Yeah. Before we do that, let's talk about budget. I really got interested in this. What's the budget of your church? Ooh. We just closed the year 2012. How much money did you spend in your church last year? Whoa. Let's say we spent $100,000 last year. Good. What'd we spend it on? Ourselves. Well, yeah. We repainted the walls, and we got new carpet, and we bought new chairs, and we got pads on the pews, and got fans. We spent the whole $100,000 on us. Why? We own it. What if he owned this place? Wonder what he'd spend the $100,000 on. Come on, track with me. We spent $100,000 last year on out of our budget on ourselves and didn't have one single new convert. Do you know how many churches on our district of the Church of the Nazarene on our district will report this year no new converts? $100,000 preached every Sunday of last year, ran a whole program, youth and kids spent $100,000, and we didn't win one person to Jesus. Well, we invited them. What'd we spend the $100,000 on? Ourselves. Why? We own it. What if we didn't own it? What if he owned this place and we had to spend the whole $100,000 on winning this community? Oh, but again, we're back to the building. Let's get off the building. Let's go back to the illustration. You are the temple. And this is not about a building. This is about you. Because you are indwelt by the Spirit, and you are the place of worship. Well, I own this place of worship in which God dwells. Yeah, I know. You know how I know that? Because that guy hit me, and I'm all upset about it. Well, why are you upset about it? Because I own this temple, and he hit me, and he shouldn't have hit me, and he doesn't have a right to hit me. And do you know that guy conned me, and he ripped me off, and I'm all upset, and I just... Why are you all upset? Because I tell you, I own this temple, and he had no right to do that to this, what I own. What if Jesus owned your temple? Well, would Jesus care if the guy hit me? No. What? You mean Jesus doesn't care if somebody comes up and socks me? No. What's he care about? Did you turn the other cheek? Is that Bible? Well, that guy just ripped me off, just stole my coat, just ripped it off. Where did he took it? Does God care? No. What's he care about? Did you run him down? Did you go after him and give him your coat too? Because the vest and the coat, as Matt said, he needs both. Well, I'm all upset. Why? That guy made me carry the packages, and I hate it, man. Does God care? No. That he made you carry the packages? No. What's he care about? Did you go the second mile with him? Wow. If he owns me, if he doesn't own me, you know what's going to spill out of me? They shouldn't. So we know who owns you. Jesus, oh my, am I under conviction? So much accusation coming out of my lips. So much upset. So much criticism. I own the grain fields, therefore I own the temple. Could I take the deed and title of my life tonight and could I sign it over to you? And it might be that if I would even attempt to do that, I would discover that you've already owned me all this time. And my ownership has been a fake ownership, and I have usurped territory that isn't mine. And I've claimed ownership to that which I had no right to. You got to get through to me about this, Jesus. You've got to break my heart. You've got to go to the depth of my insides and change me on this. You got to infiltrate me until your ownership is so strong within me. And that Jesus, as certainly as you had your own body 2,000 years ago, oh, could you have my body tonight? Could you own me like you owned your own? In fact, did you own your own, or did it belong to the Father? And were you so surrendered to Him that all that the Father wanted to do through your flesh, you allowed Him to do, even to the point of a cross? And Lord, one little ounce of discomfort and I'm all upset. Somehow, some way, in the name of Jesus, you've got to take the cross and you've got to plant it at the core of my life. And this whole deal about, wow, the one thing that you care about, the one thing that you want to get done, the whole deal about never ever think about yourself, the whole wonder of you don't own yourself, so it isn't who hits you, it's how you respond when they do. The whole deal about, it isn't about the color of the walls at all, so why do we spend any time talking about it? Forevermore, Jesus, it's about how we love one another. And it isn't about who gets their way or who doesn't. It's not about spending $100,000 on ourselves. Wow. Heads are bowed. What goes on in the grain fields goes on in the place of worship. What goes on in the place of worship is true in the grain fields. You aren't one way here and one way out there. If you get mad out there, you might as well get mad in here. Because you are the temple. And this is not about a building. This is about you. And who owns you. This is not about preacher and layman. This is not about, well, you preach I do electric work. I'm a plumber. This is about every man, every individual owned by Him, filled with Him, living in Him, praying 24 hours a day in Him, flowing with His mindset, living in His direction, yoked, linked, resting, relying, sourced by His power. Life is found there. Oh, experience that to the depth. And wherever you are in the journey tonight, take a step, will you? Take a step. Let Him possess. Be owned. Altar is open. Moments of response. Jesus, I give you myself.